I wanted to call attention to something interesting that happened in the Atlantic, which is increasingly taking over as the main source of nonsense for left-leaning elites.
Giving the New York Times a run for its money.
The New York Times has kind of spent, people have caught on to the fact that it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But
we've talked about the Atlantic a lot during COVID, and there are 3 writers that they've got in we're doing a lot of writing about COVID. I'm not sure they got anything right.
No, they didn't. I mean, nobody's perfect, but they made a pretty good show.
Yeah, they had a perfectly wrong showing.
Yeah. And they are definitely heralded. The whole magazine is in the sort of, $25 a bottle and up cocktail party realm, You're
talking about bottles of booze or bottles of wine? Yeah.
Wine.
Okay.
Yeah, no. The booze is way fancier than that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I wanted to show Zach.
But I will say before you do that, and I've said this before, but the Atlantic and Harper's are standbys. We still subscribe. We still get the hard copies, and I have loved these magazines. They have been the beacons on the hill of great writing and fantastic reporting, and the Atlantic has fallen.
Yeah, that's one standby that I will not stand by and increasingly won't even stand for. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah, it's broken. And here we can show you.
You want the first one?
Yeah, let's show the original. So the Atlantic said the quiet part out loud in the title to this article. Now, of course, titles are not produced by the authors of the article generally, but nonetheless, the Atlantic proclaims in the title to this article from, I believe, yesterday, COVID shots are still one giant experiment. Right?
Oops.
One giant experiment. Huh. I wonder if there are any, let's say, codes that would cover the application of an experiment to, let's say humanity, right? Gee, the Nuremberg Code might be one. And oh my God, if the Nuremberg Code applies to these shots, do you know what we were entitled to? You're not going to believe this. Unless you remember the beginning of the episode where we talked about informed consent, right? We would have been due informed consent in the event that we were exposed to an experiment, which we apparently clearly were, as far as the people who titled that piece in the Atlantic is. So, all right, let's say maybe that was just one editor who was off their meds who titled the thing, and the rest, it does not reflect an experiment, right? And so that would explain why the Atlantic then swapped out quickly without saying anything the title. Yeah, within a day they swapped it out. So I got this from the Wayback Machine. Now let's see what is the article currently titled, Zach?
That's it.
Oh, Fall's COVID shots may be different in one key way. Well, that doesn't say experiment at all, huh?
No, it's got the same subtitle. It's the same article.
It's the same article. The article is, in fact, unchanged. Now, scroll down to the paragraph, where there's a paragraph in there.
I'll see if I can find it.
That says that it does not use the term experiment, but what it does is it, in some very mealy-mouthed way, says that the COVID shots are effectively a big beta test, which is a synonym for experiment, right? That is a not ready for prime time. You got it?
Yep.
So at the same time, COVID vaccines are still at a sort of beta testing stage. Interesting. Are still in a sort of beta testing stage. They don't even want to say it flat out. But the point is, the original title of the article, that sentence, the history of what has gone on in the Atlantic, makes it very clear that they know that they are dealing with an experiment and therefore ought to know that Nuremberg applies. And even if they don't understand what Nuremberg is or where informed consent is, these are well-educated people. These are people who went to fine schools and benefited from all that comes from that. They ought to know. And what I'm wondering, when a recognition like this circulates through the offices at the Atlantic, or whatever happens on their email lists, or however it is that these people gather, How is it that all of these people who presumably took these shots themselves, nobody in that community says, hey, wait a minute. Nobody told me it was an experiment. In fact, I remember very distinctly, they told me it was safe and effective. They specifically put out animations that told me that although the process had been accelerated, every single step was done, and that they knew these things to be safe, and that if I took them, I would not get the disease, and I would not suffer any ill effects from them.
And I wouldn't kill my neighbors.
Right. Now, nobody says that, right? There's no acknowledgement. You should have people by the 1,000 saying, wait a minute, experiment? This was an experiment? You lied to me. You told me it was something other than an experiment, and now you're telling me after I can't undo it?
You told me the experiments had already been done.
Yeah.
And the clinical trials were, yes, accelerated, but complete. Those were lies.
Those were lies, and the point is they weren't, we're not talking about civil liability or even criminal guilt. We are talking about something above that. We are talking about violations of the Nuremberg Code and of the Hippocratic Oath, and we are also talking about violations of our free speech rights in order to obscure all of this, right? This is a four-alarm fire. This is civilization violating all of its sacred principles simultaneously, and doing so with human life and limb on the line, right? It couldn't be more important, and it is time that we sobered up and we looked at the violations of our most sacred principles that we are engaged in and said, who the hell is in charge here, right? How are we going to undo this before it's too late?